We're going to show up shortly. You ready?
Okay.
You're being faded in.
Faded in.
And say something so we make sure the audio works.
I'm saying something so that the audio works.
I actually didn't see the... Well, let's just do it works. Wait, say something else so I can see your little bars go.
I'm saying something so I can see it works.
Yeah, you might even be clipping a little bit. All right.
I can like turn my mic down, I guess.
Oh no, I have a whole overly complicated interface for that. People might even be watching this anyway. We're back. It's 2021. We're going to do this again, where I talk to people who work at Tlon about why they work here and what crazy, unlikely sequence of events led them to end up here. Anyway, I'm Galen. This is Matilde.
Hi,
we don't
I'm
know
Matilde.
where this is going, but we're going to go for it for the next, I don't know.
The stream or Urbit?
Oh, the stream. Well, we're going to go for it with Urbit for quite a while, but this stream will only go for, I don't know, 45 minutes.
We don't know where it's going. You know, it's a train, has its own will, its own volition.
Yeah,
we really channel the world spirit here.
Generally true. Although actually, in the case of the stream, I think we're the ones driving this train. Hi to Nico Demo. Does anyone pronounce that name? Anyway, there's someone in the chat. I can't chat and talk to someone at the same time, so I'm
relay questions. Relay questions.
I'll try and do that from time to time.
Okay, so we're talking about how we got here, right? That's what we're talking about.
Let's start somewhere. I mean, you can kind of decide where to start. I think, anyway, the thing that I'm always interested in is basically, it's like, how did you get interested in, we work on, I'm not even sure how to exactly categorize the kinds of things that we work on. I'm biased towards thinking that it has some resemblance to architecture, which might just be me trying to justify my own background. But it obviously attracts all these people from different, with like different interests. So the goal is just to figure out, sort of locate you. It's like, where are you from? And like, what were you kind of working on and thinking about, like, before we met and you got interested in Urbit? Because I think when we met, you were not, actually, maybe the first question would be, you didn't really know about Urbit when we first started talking, which I think
I was aware of Urbit. I wasn't on Urbit. And around the time we first started talking, I got my planet and got set up pretty easily. It wasn't that bad. But I remember at the time, it was like June 2019. We were still like bonking aims every other day and getting onto getting on Bridge and getting things set up. I think you said that it needed some like onboarding help at the time, but I didn't find it to be that bad. Like, it was like, I mean, I guess that was pretty technical, so it was fine.
Yeah, there's always this, like, the thing with onboarding is that I've always felt like Urbit, just like if you were somewhat technical, the onboarding is not bad at all. But like, in terms of if you're, like in terms of sort of conventional software, the onboarding's basically impossible.
And you were doing these chats with the community every Friday on the old landscape, like pre-module landscape.
Oh yeah. Thinking about doing that again. I like can't keep up with Urbit community anymore right now, so I like I sort of feel bad about. Like, I don't know why, it doesn't matter. It is what it is. But anyway. So yeah, I was thinking about scheduling something. Anyway, okay. So do you remember when you first heard about Urbit, or does that even matter, or is it just that like at some point you were prompted to get back into it? I'm actually kind of curious to contextualize your academic or whatever, like sort of writing interests in the, like, I don't know, kind of bridge that gap. I don't know.
I'm gonna get there. But you're asking me about specifically my literacy around Urbit, the project itself, right?
I guess you can kind of start with either one. I don't know. I'm not doing a great job of driving. You drive.
Okay, I'll drive. So don't laugh or get mad, but I'm gonna zoom back like pretty far.
That's fine.
So I grew up in wine country in a loyalist colony town of like 10,000 people in Niagara here. I went to Catholic school for 14 years because in Ontario here we have free Catholic school. It's a parallel public board.
Wow, so, that's amazing. That's crazy.
It's weird, but it's like a historical anomaly that no one has corrected or really like changed. And apparently the Catholics are too strong to do anything about it. So while other provinces in Canada have sort of like rolled them back, Ontario still has it. So yeah, free Catholic school for 14 years, mass every week, whatever.
And this is just like it's like there's like a huge Catholic population. That's kind of like it's like remnant of there were a bunch of right, got it.
Yeah, because Canada has 40% Catholic population, whereas the United States is all Protestant.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
It's actually a really weird cultural divide that I actually think is underestimated. In terms of like what your relationship is with like a whole lot of things. Anyway, so in my time in high school, I basically min-maxed out of STEM. Basically, the moment
I know what STEM is, but okay, yeah.
Min-max is when you optimize your build, in an MMORPG. It's when you actually specification yourself in a specific way. I closed like after grade 10. Which is like we have 12 grades. I dropped all the science credits I could drop, and I just focused on like film and English exclusively, and like philosophy classes and whatnot.
Yeah.
At the time, it was because my grades were a lot better and it came to me a lot more easily.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I sort of closed my understanding of the sciences entirely from that point forward. Like I have very basic knowledge of math, but nothing further than like algebra.
But wait, are you saying that you were good enough at math and science that everyone was like, all right, fine, you don't have to keep doing this because you already know everything, or you were somehow able to just stop? You were like, forget it, I'm not doing this anymore.
After grade 10, you don't have to.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Unless you're going to university for the sciences. Yeah. I was going to go to university for the arts, and so the only thing I needed was a bunch of academic credits in the humanities. I only took humanities courses.
Yeah.
Specifically because it came so easy to me, and I didn't like doing work. So I basically was I plowed through high school very easily, went into university here in Toronto. That's how I came to Toronto, and I've been here for the last 10 years since then. Yeah. I was going to do English and philosophy, but I found that the only thing that gave me proper context for like sort of our current era backward in terms of art movements was film. And so the first year English courses in university were like, here's the Western canon.
Wait, let's dig into that a little bit.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry, so what's the epiphany or kind of like what, make that more into a story, right? Like, why is it that film is the thing that helps us understand the world that we live in?
Okay, yeah. So essentially when I came to university, I felt that I had no sense of like a historical narrative as to the traditions of the media I enjoyed. Like I just enjoyed media, but they were sort of anomalous. They were floating. They didn't get strung into anything. If I look back now, clearly I loved, modernist literature. Like I loved stuff from like the 60s and the 70s, but I'm not really sure what that means or why I like this book called House of Leaves, even though it's not very like it. It's like I didn't know the relationship of these things at all.
Yeah.
And when I went to university, I was looking for somebody to give me that context. And in English and philosophy courses, you got like context from the year 0 to the year 2000. The year 1800 or whatever. Because the last book we read in English was Don Quixote.
Yeah.
But nothing further. And so the context it was giving was different. I was looking for here backward.
Yeah.
Whereas film was a lot more recent. And so film was sort of contextualizing from modernist stuff here and then going backward to trace the modes. So part of that was that the film courses went from a formalist perspective of like understanding media to sort of pick apart these things as to what they're doing on each layer of the medium. But also sort of the relationships between the movements came from here and went backward, Like it was like there's a tradition of filmmaking called art cinema that sort of happened in like the 60s as a blowback from like the 50s traditions of the Hollywood moment and the tradition of excellence in France, for example.
Sure.
But those themselves had traditions in theater, and those themselves had traditions, from novels. And so in order to explain that, they'd have to go back quite a bit. And in doing so, I found myself learning a lot more about this moment in history.
Right. Wait, so
and its relationship to the past.
It's sort of that film builds that bridge. So you're saying like
yes.
one of the difficulties
yes.
of like basically like trying to understand literature is that it's difficult to understand how we got like most of the media we consume today is visual or is like audio visual or I mean now it's like or is networked or whatever. But like being able to connect that all the way back even to Don Quixote or before is like very difficult, especially if like most of the media that you soaked up has like basically totally different structure. And film is like the bridge by which you can kind of understand those connections because film starts out in this extremely, this kind of like direct from theater and like sort of like literary traditions of like the late 19th century and then kind of like gets translated into things that are pretty linear, and then that sort of fragments and continues to fragment until it becomes whatever streamer culture. Now brings us to the present. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Well, because literature has a different sort of tradition at the moment, where it's like it's vaguely postmodern or like meta-modernist literary fiction, you know, like Cloud Atlas, where it's like we have like several narratives that comprise one larger narrative. And it's the implied relationships between those narratives that becomes the story that you're trying to read. You know, that is itself like the kind of mode that we're in right now. But connecting that to say like the tradition of making the novel is itself sort of like there's a big gap of like 100 years that I think film was actually a great way to patching over because
but it might be that
the two related to each other. You know.
Yeah, but there are other cultural influences like that and things going on in the world, or even just like the sort of artistic creative traditions that are adjacent to literature and writing that have a huge impact on the way that people structure and think about books, right? And so anyway, I think, I agree that you can't really understand you can't read certainly something like Cloud Atlas or even like, Don DeLillo or whatever, like you can't like consume those things in a vacuum. Like if you're not also understanding like media culture, then you can't really read those things.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that speaks more to my own ignorance, but that's what I was looking for from university. Anyway, so we're getting closer. The back half of my education in university had to do with kind of psychoanalytic theories of film, which then got me to sort of think about the screen, full stop, and the relationship between peoples and screens, and what that sort of psychological connection was. In the back half of my career, I started to get very interested.
We need to understand that too. So you mean like the screen as a medium, like my like physical relationship between like, the literal sort of perpendicularity of like the screen versus me staring, like me looking at something that is a surface, like what do you mean, like
the psychological mechanisms of viewing and the identification that happens when one views. The relationship between me and this screen is one of like a tenuous sort of connection where I identify with the screen. And it's like this sort of thin thing, a thin little layer between me and like a dream that I'm personifying.
Which is obviously different than like when I watch something happen on the street or even when I watch a play. Like the sheer fact of it being projected on a two-dimensional surface, like, induces a kind of dreamlike attachment to the thing that's going on. Not what you'd see in the theater in real life. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. A lot of these are sort of they're either like very mid 20th century theories that have been sort of investigated or debunked or whatever, but I still find them to be very fascinating. Anyway, I got interested in the relationship between film theory's understanding of the screen and interactive media, which is itself even less investigated because of the fact that academia is just a little slow. And so when I was trying to find people who could like give me some context on making a relationship between creating interactive media and film theories of the psychology of viewing or whatever, there wasn't a whole lot there. There was like some Lev Manovich books from the 90s, and that was it. And like it's like in a lot of ways, academia never left the 90s, which made it very compatible with say watching 90s anime or whatever. That was very hyping up the power of technology. And so I was myself sort of stuck in that era too. Anyway.
I mean, if you're someone who grew up on the internet or was interested in interactive media or had some impact on you, which I would argue there are very few people who are not impacted by it, at least in the sort of worlds that we grew up in, although, it's like, which are very different in some ways, but like similar media culture. It's amazing. it's a commonplace in a way, but like just the shift in the way that the kinds of things that people consume is so huge. And when you're a kid, at least for me, I remember that same thing, thinking like, it's weird that there's no kind of like textbook on interactive media that I can just like look at to understand how this stuff works and like what are the like underlying design principles. And I think I actually spent a lot of time kind of feeling like that was, I never really thought about the fact that of course there's nothing on this topic because it's so young that no one understands it. And it actually is probably still true, and it will probably remain true. It could remain true for kind of a long time, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, it wasn't like I went straight from university into like my personal career, but you know, there was a period of time where I was working retail. There was a period of time where I was working tech support. But then I started to make video games because I was interested in how to explain this, the ways in which computer interfaces encode narrative information to people. You know, I'll tell you right now.
Sure.
Like when you get like an alert prompt, that's a narrative trope. You know.
Yeah, like inserts you into a narrative of the thing, basically.
Well, the way I always imagined it was like it's, you know how when you're writing when your computer is writing like an MP3 file, sure, there's an MP3 type to help your operating system, but the thing itself encodes it with a header that says, you know, this is encoded under this file format. Here's the contents. You know. I thought that was the same way with like alert prompts or interfaces and just more vaguer senses like buttons and whatnot.
You mean but they're telling you that, like you're saying, they tell the user like switch into this mode of encoding your experience or something like that.
Yes, they are trying to encode information to you with a specific sort of appearance. You know.
Yeah.
A boilerplate or templating. And so I was thinking if I could manipulate this, I could tell interesting stories based upon the same tropes that we see in computers, but I could also sort of play on the expectations and what we get from computers to sort of surprise people, you know, that there are sort of implied barriers that you can fool around with.
But you're to give it seems like it's connected to this, but it's also just saying like it's actually kind of interesting in the arc of cinema, right? It's like cinema goes from basically like linear, like sort of complete narratives to maybe like more fragmented narratives to actually narratives that are actually disparate because you navigate them through the internet or something like that. And you're saying, well, interaction or like actual software is basically this disparate set of narratives, whether it's in a game or whether it's in something else that you're basically letting the user patch together. However you want.
What are you laughing at?
Oh, just like Daveen's, congratulations, you're dead. So yes, when you die in a video game, you have you're like, so you can also have someone experience the narrative of death or something. Maybe that's not exactly what he means.
Oh,
that's the worst thing. Sure.
Where was I going with that? Shoot, I lost it.
It sense to me as actually the arc between you're like interested in, it's like if you're interested in sort of like filmic experience, and then you can see it actually also being something you control within a computer, and actually games are relatively linear by comparison to like, you know, open-ended software. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, we would usually just call this formal experimentation. Like it's like when the screen is sort of like relishing in the fact that it is the screen. Like like for example, in film classes, we would always say that was the horror of The Ring, is that The Ring reversed the relationship between person and screen to have someone jump out of the screen at you. You know?
Yeah.
There's a bit of a weird horror of like that thing coming out of the TV because it's a one-way transaction, you know? You're laughing again like someone's talking.
Yeah, I'm just responding I'm listening to you. Yeah. This is the problem with, should we just not even, this is
streams, who needs them? We should pre-record it.
This is now I'm engaged in the narrative of you and the narrative of whatever is anyway.
Yeah, like for example, like the first game that I made with my fiance at the time, it did a thing where it was like it played on tropes of like retro gaming, but for systems I never used. But at the same time, it also changed the story depending on how many times you played it. So if you played it and you refresh to show a friend, it would be a completely different game as though you did it a one-off. You know, it's like all the damage you did is still there, and there's like some leftover fragments that are themselves like sort of like violently invaded by you coming back to experience it again. I was trying to create a connection between getting information and doing violence. That like accessing was itself a form of attack.
It's interesting.
And
it's definitely like very nonlinear for the user, or like
it was very it's great for kids. They loved it. Like if you're a teenager, you're like, whoa, the creepypasta game.
Wait, this game actually involved pasta?
No. Creepypasta is like a 4chan term or something for like.
Sure.
It's a copy and pasted story that's scary.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, got it.
It's like a 2000s 4chan term actually. Anyway, so yeah, I started to make video games full time with some friends and my fiance at the time, and we just got a bit more creative with it after that. Like the one that I always talk about with people with Sub-Serial Network. This is how we're gonna get to Urbit soon, okay?
I think this is the only one I'm familiar with. Anyway, I haven't played, but was like, this is like when we first met, this is the last thing you had done, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it wasn't the last. Okay, we actually had one after that, but it was like smaller. But Sub-Serial Network was like the last big thing.
Yeah, and that's the one that it like this. Yes, this is the one that did reasonably well, or like was reasonably well known.
There was one before that was more well known. Sub-Serial Network is sort of like my baby, but the one that everybody knows is localhost.
Well, the only thing I remember is that we met and I didn't know who you were, and so like trying to figure out, okay, what has this person worked on and where are you coming from? It was like the last thing I found, I think, was Sub-Serial Network, which I then read a good amount about and played actually for just I think bought and played a little tiny bit of, and I'm pretty sure it was that one and not localhost.
Did it have multiple windows?
Yeah, it was like simulating its own. Yeah, it did have multiple windows, which is part of what was it like.
Yes.
Actually, I thought was really brilliant about the. It's like something I'd never seen before, and I thought was pretty cool.
I love that we made that one work. It was just it was Electron and like 7 instances of like Twine that was communicating with like IPC messengers between all these these windows.
I mean, the part that was cool about it, it was technically pretty interesting too. Like it was, I didn't actually I wasn't sure if you were having Electron spawn processes or something. Like I was like, I don't know how this is working exactly, but I've never seen anyone kind of pull that off. It it's interesting because it treats the computer. You should probably get more conscious of what's going on there, but it treated your computing environment like an environment, right? It was like you already are in this world, and I'm gonna like modify. It's like it was like AR for like your computer or something like that.
Okay, so cool. Sub-Serial Network is a video game that tells a post-singularity science fiction narrative through 3 windows on your computer. One's like a little web browser that you search keywords in. One's a music player, and one's like an email client. And as you navigate through the world, you'll get emails coming in, you'll unlock songs and whatnot, but you have to sort of like research and find the right keywords to sort of uncover the mystery that's going on. Like it's gradually unveiled that you're using some sort of a proxy to like an alternate world's IP protocol or whatnot, due to the fact that like your IPv4 format breaks everything in this environment, and that there's like this world of robots that are constructing an internet out of their own body parts to sort of free themselves from being recreated in the image of humans. And what's really interesting about this?
Go ahead.
What's really interesting about that was that there were moments where you would have to download like PDFs to like your computer's desktop. Like it would just dump it on your desktop and open up a PDF that works on your computer that you would have to correlate with stuff in the game. So you have to think about your computer as if it were another part of the tool set here. And so you'd have to open up your own notepad to keep track of like the right clues. You'd have to like, we were going to do some sort of stuff like we were going to include Doom wads if we could, or like we kind of wanted to include some things on the actual internet that you'd have to correlate with this fake internet, but we figured that wouldn't make the game too ephemeral. Like we'd have to keep something hosted, so to speak. So
it still has this like go ahead. Oh, just like it has this like there's a very like alternate reality. Like it seems like you can keep going and going, like where it's like, is it only contained within your computer, or are there things that you have to do, I don't know, sort of like like you could really like keep it going outside of you need like someone has to turn on their webcam and you like use face recognition to make sure they like say a certain thing or do it. You can start to like, it's almost like you're training people to like live in this world a little bit, and then you can't tell the difference actually between the the game world and the like. Most games have such a strong boundary between like this is the game world, you know, like I sit down, turn on console, am in game world, and anyway, just the sheer.
But that's what I mean.
Yeah, like
those are framework understandings where
right.
where you think that they cannot be transgressed or invaded, and that's what I thought was sort of interesting, was that this thing had sort of manifested itself and was accepted as something unseen by people, and I wanted to play with it to be like, well, this is a very tenuous thing that we're doing, you know, when we're actually interacting with screens.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about in like urban context too. Anyway, you're going to say something else. Go for
it. Okay, the first thing I was going to say was that it's kind of funny because it shows that a new media academia is so young that all the games that I made, I'm often finding are being taught because people are sort of accessing it from syllabi or buying it from the same university all at once.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was kind of like weird. That's like, oh yeah, obviously this is so young that it's like I had to write the examples myself.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But the other thing that was interesting was that it got me in touch with Toby Shorin, who hosted our OS1 event. What, 10 months ago, 9 months ago?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Toby's also, that's the ultimately what creates connection, because now I'm like, how do I know? I mean, I basically know Toby through just like Arena World, which is an alternate reality game of its own. I don't know exactly how I know Toby, but anyway, yeah, that's like the thing that, and I think actually, I mean, Toby cold reached out to me and I think he had just played the game. I think it may have been just the game.
No, it was a while ago. Okay, so he followed me at the start of 2019.
Yeah.
Because he was a fan of my work.
Yeah.
And when I followed him back, he was like, "Whoa, you're talking to me?" And we just sort of like shook hands and hung out from then forward. And as I was speccing into like computer software development more generally, I was hanging out with Toby, and he was like, "You know what? I think you'd get along great with Galen. I should introduce you."
There you go. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just remember, or you're triggering a memory of his first email to me, which was like,
Sub-Zero Network is great. You should talk to this
girl.
Like
I think he was like, I played this and I really liked it. You guys should talk. Like that was definitely like the reference.
Yeah, and you I believe Tlon at the time was like a little understaffed on front end.
Yeah. Yeah. Still are probably. Oh, just like that's like an understatement. Like, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I was calling you about. It was like, well, I can do front end if you want me to do front end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this funny that whole thing was funny because it was still a time where we were like probably like less organized than we are now, right? And at that time, I was like thinking that what would be great would be potentially like one thing that could be great is just have people experimenting with sort of more self-contained individual projects, right? And so I was like, well, you have experience building games. You didn't have as much experience as you do now, obviously, of actually basically like, you know, sort of like more holistic engineering work. And
so
I
was like, so fresh.
Yeah.
I was like a month out of learning JavaScript.
Yeah. JavaScript. Still want to rename JavaScript. Anyway.
ECMAScript.
That'd be a good trend. But yeah, anyway, the original thing was I was thinking, oh, maybe you should try, because I do think Urbit still, there's like really interesting things that you can imagine, like games to build on Urbit, basically. Like I think games on Urbit is super interesting. And so I was like, oh, let's do some form of very simplistic game on Urbit, which is still a good idea.
Yeah.
Someone should do this. Or if someone is interested in doing this, we are also interested in doing this, but we've obviously moved on to other things. And anyway, we started experimenting with it and then.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like visualizing the distance of ships from your ship via ping.
Yeah.
So you could calculate like the relative pings of all the peers you know of to then see like the space of the network more broadly, and also you could correlate that with our knowledge of their sponsor to then see like where the ships are in proximity to their sponsor.
Yeah, didn't we come up with something that had to do with storytelling though too? Like there was something about like you were like sort of like discovering a story by these like. It was similar in a way to Sub-Serial Network, right? It was like you'd kind of like explore the network and discover fragments of a story and like pull it back together or something to that effect. Is that right?
I like you know, burying little narrative things that way. Yeah. But in general, I think the first thing I want to do was like an increasing difficulty like seed generator thing for roguelike like system. Like it was like we were gonna make a roguelike single player game that needed the urban network to co-sign entropy seeds to make the game more hard.
Right.
That was the first one, and then the second one was like a gardening Animal Crossing kind of thing.
Yeah. Still think that's a good idea. The roguelike one never fully. I don't think I understood how you would. I think it was like those things where I was like, wait, but why would people actually want to continue to make it more hard? I feel like people would be like, I'm not going to keep doing this. Why do I want to make this hard?
I mean, why do people play games? They want to be challenged, you know?
Not me. But I'm not much of a gamer, honestly. I think I'm interested in the pure sensory experience, I think.
So, in terms of my relationship with Urbit, full stop.
Yeah.
I was only aware of it, but I had never actually used it because I was in decentralization spaces, basically.
Right.
I was like hanging out on Matrix. I was on the Fediverse since like 2016. But Urbit itself was like, I had never touched it, and the people I would have spoken to on the Fediverse would have said I used it in like 2018. It didn't work, and I haven't gone back. You know?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people like that still.
Yeah, I think that's normal. Many. Yeah. There's a lot of that. Which is fine. Wait, can you actually hang out? Sorry, like where do you hang out on Matrix? Because they're like a Matrix like community thing, or is it like communities use Matrix, right?
The communities use Matrix.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was like,
I don't know. There was a time where it was like Matrix was pretty comfy, but like I don't know. I don't use it that much anymore.
It seems to work really well. People love it. I mean, like, but it seems also like it's aimed at it's like a Slack competitor. I feel like. Seems less social than more enterprise or something. I don't know. Anyway, Matrix. Honestly, I'm generally always impressed with Matrix like technical competency. I just don't use it. I was just curious whether there was like a social component I didn't know about.
Yeah. I mean, anyway. I don't know. That's what makes me an anomalous sort of hire, I guess, was that I was not somebody who was in the community. I knew nothing about it. And after I was hired is when I really got involved with it.
But you're
so it was kind of like
the Toby thing is like, I mean, it's true that generally like Tlon is. When we hired you, I think you were probably the third person who wasn't like a dedicated, really involved community member or something like that. We don't, for the most part, everyone at Tlon has like been around forever. But then it's like, I don't know, like, you're in like an adjacent world, and like, you got connected to us through someone. It's like always good. It's not a requirement, but.
And somehow it worked, you know? Like I would say that my relationship with Ed is like anomalously synergistic. I don't know how to say any better. Like me and Ed seem to see interfaces the same way in terms of understanding them as like extensions of bodies and whatnot. And what it is to actually construct something that's extensible, like truly extensible. And
here's
that's
a question,
what what's up?
Well, we'll just so you guys are in the what's the Pacific Rim in the drift together. But like, did you think you were thinking about games and thinking about interfaces the way that we think about interfaces being basically like tools, just kind of like open-ended things? And it's actually just because, like Ed and I have a slightly different way of thinking about this, because we just have different backgrounds. Like you guys tend to think much more narratively than I do. That's just like which is great. It's fine. But I wonder whether you were thinking about that like, going from like film to games, right, is like a similar jump from going to games to like basically like interface tools. But is that something that you were really thinking about when you came to work on Urbit itself? You know what I'm saying? Like, is that a transition that kind of just happened on its own?
I think that it was encouraged the longer I was here, but I did have a sort of a curiosity about what interface abstractions actually were doing, I guess. Like how to phrase this any better? Like in the latter half of Subserial Network, there's a lot of talk about how to me, the person playing the game, it's just managing information.
Yep.
But to the subserials who live in the network, who are one with the network, it is an act of like violence or management or whatnot. That this button abstracts a very concrete reality for a lot of people, and that increasing abstraction was something I was becoming very aware of in the latter parts of my time in games that I really wanted to work on more broadly. And that's when I started to come to the conclusion that it was like an upstream problem from the stack when I came to Urbit, and I saw that it could change, that we could build something that was completely unlike the ways that websites were built.
That's interesting. Yeah. Like it's like, oh, like this is this powerful like narrative tool or like tool for like making people think in different ways. But like if you're going to actually exercise that, you need, sort of like having the space to exercise that means you need a different stack that you're building on top of.
Yeah.
That's obviously that's true.
Well, it's like it's the difference between like, we're all logging on to this one server's one interface.
Yeah.
And the difference between like all of us have agreed on our collective body's intermediation, and we will manipulate the flows between that body in an agreed upon way, because we're all running software that's permissioned amongst a set of computers that are running their own thing, as opposed to we are all clients looking at one computer's interface.
Yeah.
So instead of being food for a bigger body, we are a bunch of bodies that are connecting and intermediating.
Yeah, and like then like the individual's experience though, it's like in terms of just like it's the difference between, I mean, it is kind of the difference between kind of like late 40s like narrative Hollywood cinema and like whatever, choose your own, and almost like gaming, choose your own adventure, like you like create your own narrative or something like that, right? Like when everybody uses Facebook, like we all participate more or less in the same narrative, and the structure of that narrative is just decided on by one piece of software. There's only so many possible narratives. It's very constrained. But when everybody runs their own software, and that software potentially varies quite a lot, we're not quite there yet, but it's not too far off. Then you have this kind of like, I mean, it's not even a matter of the kind of like, I don't know, polemic argument for it or not for it. It's just a lot more like fun and weird and interesting.
Yeah. I think that there's an intermediary step for actually encouraging this process, where it's like in Unreal Tournament from 1999, there was this thing called mutators, where you could like turn on Instagib, and every time I kill somebody, they explode now or something. It's like there is a twist upon the formula that I can do in this one instance. And that's something that we're like working our way to in Landscape, but what we want is something even further than that, which is to say that we want to sort of manipulate the interface's representation of the underlying data in a very configurable and extensible way. So we're starting to play with that by our moving to everything being a graph, because these things should be interchangeable. What I really like is this notion where collections could be an arena like where I could like save chat messages or save blog posts as if they were any other block, that you could scrapbook literally anything you see because it's all the same underlying thing.
I'm still hung up on this. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, keep going.
I was going to say that there's a lot of products that are sort of trying to approximate this in their own way, but I think that in the long term, they're going to have a lot of limits on how far they can take it. But I think that over time, as we make this more extensible and modular, we'll show that we can actually configure this in a very, almost like an infinite way. Whereas like if you were to bolt on a new feature onto any other product, you have to do a lot of work on the back end to make it seem simple, quote unquote.
Yeah, but it still like boils down to just the fact that like if you're the user of a, see if I can like make it simpler. It's like the difference between using a hardware MPC and using Ableton or something like that. I mean, there's hardware a lot you can do with MPC. Like basically like it's one thing to have like any monolithic piece of software only has so much modification that can be done by the user. And in an Urbit world, you have the potential to have an enormous amount of agency over their own environment, and not only its look and feel, but like how its data is organized and so on. And then there's a whole line of argument how that's basically like what we're incentivized to do. And I always try to point people at like, look, if you look at like DAW software, like digital audio workstation stuff, like there is this kind of gradient of like, you can approach it as a monolithic thing, you can kind of take it apart, you can write software for it, you have all this like, recombinability, and that's what's so cool about it and so powerful. And you're just like never, like if you think that's interesting and you think that's powerful, then, and you think that should exist more broadly than just on basically software that's running locally, then you have this kind of like stack problem.
Yeah.
That's a whole other argument. But anyway, I think that's like an advantage though that's just a side effect of Urbit itself. Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting Yeah, we're definitely getting closer though to being able to
Yeah.
realize that. I mean, even just the fact that you can say, like, when you create a group and you have like this pretty like broad variety of different channels and channel types,
Yeah.
it is like, I'm like, look, Telegram group is certainly more performant in certain ways, but like, it's there's already a lot more flexibility in using Urbit.
I think that we're about to really to show what that means, but we're at the bare level right now.
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
at
it's
we're at
very
we're at
basic.
ground
Yeah,
level.
yeah, it's super basic. Yeah. Yeah, I've been
It's an
thinking
exciting
about like,
moment.
yeah, I really want a like a graph explorer like on the level of like a PHP MyAdmin or like the CouchDB Explorer or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I think another thing that's missing here is that like the everything in Ur is very like ground up, and so it's like there's the foundation there is actually like relatively cool. Like all the graph store stuff is powerful, but it's not yet something where you can like rapidly sort of like, you can't just explore the raw data. You can't like rapidly prototype with it. Like you
You wanna
could, but you kind of don't have like the
Yeah,
tooling there.
you want to actually provide tools to like walk the graph yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like you want just like could like totally generic Graph Explorer. I was like, yeah, I was actually like looking at I was reading that Plan 9. There's like someone doing a sort of Plan 9 review. I've actually never run Plan 9, but it was making me think that like there was I was like, man, I need to go back and actually run Plan 9 and think about this because I feel like
Galen's on nine
there's
front. You're warned.
I don't. I like know so little. I mean, I know about it in terms of its like I know about its like social history much more than I know about the
Yeah.
particulars, basically. But it made me want to get in there because the idea that you like, it's like Urbit has these like different, basically like agents for storing data. So it's not like everything's a file. It's like everything's in some types data store.
Yeah.
But there's obviously, yeah, some spiritual relationship there. Anyway. Um,
What I find interesting is that you think about all of this a lot more physically than I do. Like, I think you think of Urbit more like a Walkman than I do.
Urbit is like a Walkman.
Where it's like I don't think about any object in my hand. I think about like uh I always call it the brainworm, but I don't mean it like brainworms like the way people usually say it. I think of it like when I'm thinking, there's like a phantasm of a hand that's coming out of my head, and it can metamorphose into all different kinds of things. But like when I try to do this with a computer, it forces me into being like a couple of different hands, but I can't actually make it any other thing that I want it to be. It's like a transforming thought form. That's what I think of when I think of like good software. Is that it becomes like a thought form
Okay.
body that can actually like change its shape in a whole bunch of different ways as it needs to. Like I think of it as
Okay.
like a transcendent thought form, and you think of it as like a good building.
Yeah. So this was such a. Um, I do think there are two types of designers or people who make things. Like and you can see it's like it's actually it's a difference between Mies and Corbusier. So like Miesian buildings are all about their materiality and basically revealing sort of like the truth of what they're made from. That's I think like what Miesian work is about. Or
Yeah.
Miesian work is mostly garbage. Mises work is just about the stuff that's made out of. Corb's work is about the narrative experience of the building and how it creates and provides options for different narratives within that thing. And they're very playful. They're like kind of balance of open-endedness and playfulness. And I just think of those as like those are like the two, kind of like archetypical design approaches. And I'm definitely much more like I'm interested in the thing as a mechanism, like as
Yeah.
a tool, and what its qualities are as like as a tool and an object. And I think if you think about that clearly, then and it's made well, then there are many possible like narrative experiences through
Yeah.
whatever that thing is. But I do think it can be successful to think about it the other way around, where you kind of like start with these maybe like what are the dominant narrative experiences that I want to have like as possibilities here, and you kind of hit this nice balance of like open-endedness by finding the most, I don't know, like poignant or powerful ones or something like that. But actually that is really, I mean, that's also definitely the difference between me and Ed and probably you and I. But like Gavin is probably a little bit more like I am actually in that way. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't think one is they're like complementary. But yeah, I definitely think about software as like you're trying to
Like,
create a system. It's all about the system and the quality of the
okay,
system, and it's like watch like yeah.
okay. Imagine that you have your body map, right? Like you have the way your brain thinks that your body looks like on the periphery,
Yeah.
and you want to move your fingers here.
Yeah.
But when you actually go and look, you only have one finger. But your head's like, you have five. You know you have five, and you're trying to
Yeah.
flex the other four fingers, but you can't. All
Yeah.
you can do is move the one.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like when I go on Twitter and all I can do is like. It's like
Yeah.
I have a body that can do anything. Why is
Yeah.
it making me only move the one appendage? And so every time I try to actually use something, it's like I'm being forcibly constricted into a very limited body that can only move in jerks and spasms. When what I want is for like my heart to sprout out the arms and legs that it needs in that moment.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like and I feel like Urbit is that heart, that it has the power. It has the power to sprout any body it needs to for any moment.
This is best summarized in like I'm just imagining like one of those anime like I don't know, where like the group of people like starts some lightning bolt is shared among. I don't know. This is good, better done as a visualization. Yeah, I mean, yes, I know what you mean. I also think that, yeah, I mean, so much like conventional software comes from, I think, the same place that you're coming from. It's like people just do like the sort of collective dream of like software-based tools is what you're describing. That's what most people who build software want. But the
Yeah.
question is like, what are the constraints within which you make that thing? That's like I think.
Yeah. It ends up being like distributed computation, right? It's like, well, how do we enforce the same thing on every machine? Like
Yeah.
making a body is hard once there's more than one person.
Well, but it's a question of like whether or not you're making a thing and delivering it to, like you're making a thing, you're making one mech suit and giving it to everybody, something
Yes.
like that. And can you make the most perfect mech suit and give it to everybody, or do
Yeah.
you need to let people or individual communities or whatever?
But,
Like, I mean, mech suit's a bad
but
example.
that's the thing.
Pretty
Like
pretty
in
open.
film,
Yeah.
in film we call that the transcendental subject, right? It's like there's one person and
Yeah.
all 30 people in the room are identifying with that one person's perspective.
Yeah.
That's what it is to use a website, basically, is that
Yeah.
you're being forced into the subjectivity that like a bunch of designers down the street from you, Galen, are crafting.
Yeah.
They're like, this is the body that will enforce the will of the most people at once, but that's the lowest common denominator body. If you want
Yeah.
lowest common denominator body, you're making a snail, you're making a slug. But if you want like a body that can reach the heavens, then you need a body that can become anything.
Yeah, but it's not quite that it can become anything.
You need
right?
like
I think that's like
you need the video game analog to the movie thing that we're seeing on the internet right now, where it's like you want a subjectivity that can pick up and move itself around.
Yeah, I think that's right. I guess I'm just saying that it's like the question of like how do you build something that's really universal is an ancient and long running question. Like I don't think there's no simple answer to that, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's obviously something that we think about collectively and work on in many ways, but it's not easy. Like I guess I'm like I don't think it's so straightforward as like there's finding the balance between delivering that form and letting people decide on that form is like that's a very difficult balance. That's the tension of basically doing design work, I think. And so there's neither one of those things that kind of wins out. It cannot be completely customizable and it cannot be completely predetermined. And what you predetermine has to actually make sense for the people who use it. It's complicated,
Yeah.
I think.
It's like the difference between like fingers and the humanoid shape. The humanoid shape has good utility, but it's like a very high level scaffold.
Yeah.
What?
I'm just thinking about your future robot overlords or something. Who are like, yeah, tell me about it, and they all
Do
look
we
like
have any
spiders or
questions
something.
from this, or is everyone like, I completely understand what Matilde is saying? Is everybody like, I am 100% on board?
Okay, well, here's a really painful thing about asking questions of the audience, which is that you have like a whatever 10-second delay or something, But we actually, I mean, we're at 50 minutes. I feel like this is great. Like you nailed it. We got the whole arc, got interesting background.
Oh, I thought we were
To
just
what we're
getting to
doing
the
now.
good stuff. Come on.
Where do you keep going from here? It's like, what do you mean? We covered all kinds of
Mars?
good. Yeah. I think we laid out the territory. I'm getting hungry too. That's how I know that when I'm done streaming. I start getting hungry. I'm like, I have to go eat something. I can't keep doing this. No one
I have
wants
that
to watch
effect
me
on
eat.
people.
Yeah, I need to
Making them
refuel.
hungry.
Yeah, I kind of, it's always better to stop before you run out of things to say. I mean, like, that was pretty good. We could do this again too, and maybe pick it up and try and keep going. But I think we, someone wants
I
a
wasn't
link to
asking.
the website.
I wasn't asking for questions like right now. I meant, was there one in the last 50 minutes that I?
That's a good question. Well, this is a good one, and we could just close it on this, actually. All right, so other
Sure.
criteria says, I'm on board with the dream, but don't we have the command line?
Don't we have the command line? It's like saying, don't we have an internal monologue? Yeah, sure, but like, don't you want to do things with it?
Yeah, I think
If I close my eyes and speak words to myself, yeah, I can do whatever I want, but I want to like actually change things.
You're just saying the command line is not a sufficiently effective tool.
I think that thought is an effective tool, but it has to be applied to something.
Yeah, but the command line certainly lets you take your thoughts and apply it to something. My criticism of the command line would be that it's actually like just not sufficiently like it's everybody doesn't use the command line for a reason, because actually its design is like it's not very ergonomic.
There isn't any abstraction at all. There is a read-write loop.
That's not true. The command line is definitely an abstraction. It's not a fucking punch card. You're not writing assembly. Like, it's definitely an abstraction. It's an invention. It's amazing, but I just don't think it lacks like it has no.
Hey, I love the shell. I'm just saying it doesn't hold a candle to my infinite phantasmic body.
Well, you're always going to be approximating the phantasmic body with something. So I think it's actually a fair criticism to say the command line's a start, but I think what you're saying is that you can do better. I think that's probably true.
I mean, I don't know if it'll be in JS, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, but that you just get there step by step. I don't know. I think if other criteria likes the command line, then I think some people always live in the command line, and I think Urbit will probably always have a command line too. Command line is powerful. All right, let's end it before we run out of things to say. This is fun.
Fine. Enjoy your lunch.
I will. I'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
See ya.